Yo. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Twins Talk Arsenal. Today we wanted to do a little bit of a feature episode talking about Arteta, specifically the kind of criticism which he's faced this season, and just discussing whether we think it's just and whether we think he deserves his position as Arsenal manager. If you like what you see, if you're new around here, please feel free to like, comment, and hit that subscribe button. We very much appreciate that. And yeah, we'll get into our conversation. So I think I kind of wanted to talk specifically about this issue, especially after Arsenal's two latest results. We managed to get the win against Benfica to go through to the next stage of the Europa League, and we also managed to beat Leicester City today. And for both games, there were large calls during at different points from the Arsenal fan base for Arteta to be sacked. I think kind of understandably, during the Benfica game at halftime, Arteta out was trending on Twitter, and then you had a lot of criticism for Arteta's team selection at the beginning of the Leicester game before Arsenal got started. So I just wanted to kind of cover that and see if we thought that was just. Stas, Arsenal against Benfica and Arteta out trending. Do you think that was justified?
I think it's a tough one. I think the Arsenal performance, I would say, does obviously deserve some criticism, especially when it got to the stage where Benfica were 2-1 up in the second leg, 3-2 overall, because obviously at that stage it looked like Arsenal would be heading out of the Europa League. And for a team of Arsenal's stature, for a team in theory with as high expectations as Arsenal, you do expect better. Whereas, our season could have ended, that night. So in that aspect, the team deserves criticism, but I don't think it's necessarily criticism which should fall at Arteta's door. More so, it should be to do with the underperforming players, not meeting Arteta's expectations and also the expectations of the fans. I don't think Arteta's done too much wrong since he's come to the club. He's, come to the club at a very tough time. You've seen in the past with managers since Arsene Wenger's left, managers such as Emery have come in, and, Ljungberg was interim manager for a little bit. And they all talked about a bit of a toxic atmosphere in the dressing room with some of these players which are overpaid and ultimately underperforming. Arteta's come in, first proper managerial role, not as the number 2 to Pep. He's come into this. He's had no prior experience in this type of environment, this type of situation. And this is a massive scenario for him to try and address and deal with. And I think he's done a good job overall, but he has had a lot to deal with. You'd probably have more experienced managers that wouldn't have had such a toxic atmosphere in the dressing room in their managerial career. And he's got to deal with this with no prior experience. So for me personally, it's an issue which should fall more at the team's door overall and the players themselves rather than at Arteta's door. He's done well since he's come in, and he doesn't. Obviously, the manager deserves some criticism. I know you can always argue the buck stops with the manager, but I think the level of criticism that he's received at times isn't justified for the good job that he's done in the tough environment and conditions that he's had to face while being the Arsenal manager.
I think you're kind of seeing the toxic atmosphere which Arteta had to deal with at the beginning of the season play out in Schalke right now, where 2 Arsenal rejects, Kolasinac and Mustafi, currently are, and they're currently rumoured to be leading a revolt against their manager. Admittedly, they are bottom of the league, but they've not been there for long at all, and already they're leading dressing room discontent, right? And it was meant to be those 2 players and Mesut Ozil who were kind of leading the discontent at Arsenal. So I do think criticism of Arteta is fair, but I think understanding these kind of power factions that occur within a dressing room and within players at Arsenal is really important to kind of judge his own performance as well. There's a reason why Arteta has needed to get these players out before we could start seeing positive performances from a squad which isn't undermining their manager at this point. I think criticism specifically over the last few games have been unfair towards Arteta. You know, there was widespread criticism of the Europa League game, and we got through in the end. And there was also widespread criticism of the Leicester team selection before the result, and then we go and probably give our best 90 minutes of the season, right? So I think people need to kind of take a step back, let the performances kind of speak for themselves rather than getting ahead of themselves straight away. Kind of building on top of that, I think that going forward, Arsenal, what am I trying to say? Yeah, I think going forward, the kind of performances which he's managing to get from our fringe players at the moment will be really essential. And those weren't the kind of performances that he was getting from those players during the beginning half of the season, during our kind of barren run. What do you think kind of went wrong for Arteta during that run, and what does he need? What lessons does he need to learn moving forward?
Yeah, what I would probably say in regards to that point is I do think a lot of it was due to the toxic dressing room. You know, when you think we had players like Mustafi, Kolasinac, Ozil, you know, these were players which I think were definitely overpaid, underperforming players. They were happy to sit on the bench, sit at home, you know, get their weekly paycheck. You know, they knew that they were getting paid good money for ultimately not doing much. And I think they were just in their comfort zone, happy to criticize, sit back. You know, they didn't really have the best interests of the club at heart. It was just, I don't even know the right words. I don't want to be horrible to them, but, you know, they didn't have Arsenal's best interests at heart. Whereas I think, you know, by getting rid of these players, you know, we've come to mutual agreements with them. We've terminated their contracts, or they've gone out on loan, etc. And I think the benefit that that's had is that we've got this toxic atmosphere out of the dressing room. You know, we've now got players which are fully dedicated to the cause, whether they're in our starting 11 or whether they're on our subs bench. You know, these are players that now want to come on, want to make a difference, you know, want to help the club to prosper, do well. They've all got the aim of, you know, top four, you know, European football next season. They've got the aim of wanting to win a trophy. To an extent, we've got rid of a lot of the dead wood. You know, that's why personally, I think the January transfer window was, you know, such a success for the club. You know, we signed Odegaard, we signed Matt Ryan. So we got some good players to cover in positions where we felt it was needed. But one of the other big positives was getting rid of a lot of this dead wood, which ultimately just caused a negative atmosphere in the dressing room. You know, you saw it time and time again. We had players that just weren't committed to the cause. You know, you saw when Ozil played in the latter part of his Arsenal career. You saw when Mustafi played in the latter part of his Arsenal career. You saw the same for Kolasinac. These players played and they didn't really care. They didn't really have the best interests of the club at heart. Whereas now you're seeing players come in and play and they want to show what they're about. They've got the best interests of the club at their heart. You know, they want to also prove it for themselves also, rather than just to prove it to the club or the fans. You know, they're motivated individuals, whereas we didn't have that with Ozil, Kolasinac, Mustafi. They were happy to get their paycheck and sit on the bench. So, you know, I think it's good that we've managed to get rid of them, and, you know, hopefully it will help us moving into next season.
I think let's talk a little bit about Arteta's team selection, and then we'll go on to talk about the way that Arsenal have been playing. I think the turning point in Arsenal season, which everyone kind of knows was the turning point, was when you had players like Pepe and Willian get injured early on. And then that kind of forced Arteta to bring in players like Emile Smith-Rowe and Saka, who then stayed in the team. That correlated with Arsenal's upturn in form. And we now kind of, I think Arteta knows his first 11 now, as opposed to before when he was sticking with the experienced players week in, week out, and they weren't delivering for him. That there is a lot of criticism to put towards Arteta in that way. I think when we weren't getting results, he maybe needed to shift things earlier when he didn't. And he was kind of forced into making that change, right? But I think once he was forced into making that change and he saw the result which those players kind of brought to the squad, the kind of energy that they brought, he didn't switch back immediately to the
Mm.
experienced players who are on high wages. He stuck with those young players. So, he's learning on the job as well. And you can only kind of act on what you've seen, right? If he had seen that difference and then gone back to the old experienced players, that's when you can really criticize him. But no matter how that change came about, when he did have to make that change and saw that those players really performed well, he has stuck with that team. So I feel like criticism up till the point that those players came in was fair, but afterwards to continue to criticize him for the way that he managed at the beginning is a bit unfair because he has learned and developed. And also, I think there's a positive that comes with sticking with players, showing your belief in them. And I think we're starting to see that with a few of our experienced players. We're starting to see that with Pepe, we're starting to see that with Willian, and you're seeing that with Abra as well, right? All three of these players have had a large amount of criticism this season, and it's all been fairly directed at them as well. But the only way to get these really high paid, really talented players through that criticism is to play them through that bad situation and get them to the situation where they're contributing towards the squad, feeling involved and feeling confident. And in the last few games, you're starting to see that. Aubameyang has been back scoring, back amongst the goals. You're seeing Willian starting to contribute, starting to show a bit of energy. And Pepe has been looking good for a month or two now, really giving that work ethic to the team. And that's credit to Arteta. You can't just think these players have had a bad few months. Let's cut them out completely. What are we going to do with this 3-year contract, which the player has, right? At one point, you need to reintegrate them to the team. And I think Arteta has managed to do that quite well. He's took Willian and Pepe out of the firing line. They're not in the first 11 as much, but he is subbing them on because they are talented players and they will perform. You just need to keep giving them that chance until they do. And now we're starting to see that flourish. So as much as Arteta not changing his team early on was a mistake, sometimes that stubbornness with players does pay off. And I think we're starting to see that now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what I would say in the early part of this season, when you're in Arteta's shoes, he's not had much prior managerial experience. He's only been a number 2 to Pep, where to an extent, whatever the tactics, they could be the worst tactics in the world. But if you've got £60 million players in every position, you're still going to win a fair few games. He's come from that environment to come into an Arsenal team where it's a very different dynamic in the squad. You've got players that maybe aren't good enough. You've maybe not got a talented enough squad as a whole. You've maybe got reliance on 1 or 2 players, which obviously you don't have at Manchester City. Well, to an extent, you don't have at Manchester City because their whole squad is talented. So even if you've got reliance on Aguero, De Bruyne, etc., you've still got Sterling, Mahrez, Bernardo Silva, all these players that can come up with a goal when you need it. Whereas at Arsenal, it's only a handful of players really that can get you a goal when you need it. So it's a tough one. I think when he came to Arsenal, he thought, we spent big money on Pepe, big money on Willian. These are kind of my go-to players. There's a reason we spent so much on them, on their wages, etc. These are the players that are going to get us back to the Champions League. And I think when it started off, start the season, you had a few bad games. You think it's a case of like, I'll just keep playing them. They'll come out of the bad form. Form is temporary, class is permanent, like that motto. So if we keep playing them, eventually, the goals and assists will come. The issue was obviously that never came in the early part of the season. So we were, losing and drawing a lot of games. When you look at the Premier League table, I think only 3 or 4 teams have actually lost more than we've lost. And that includes obviously teams that are in the relegation battle and all that. So, we've lost far too many games. And obviously in part it's due to, these types of players not performing when they're needed.
Yeah.
But like you touched on, we had the Chelsea game just after Christmas. We had a massive win. Willian, I think, was injured or he had COVID. I think Pepe was injured as well. So, like Emil Smith-Rowe played, Saka played. And these are 2 players that obviously haven't looked back since. I don't really think it's Arteta's fault. I wouldn't criticize him massively because I do think, if you put yourself in his shoes, you would also place reliance on the more experienced players over the hopefulness of the youth, is what I would say. Players like Emil Smith-Rowe, definitely one for the future, definitely, one of the future stars of Arsenal. But if he's not played many Premier League minutes at all. Can you entrust him to kind of save Arsenal's season at that moment in time when you don't know how well he's going to play? You don't know how well he's going to be integrated into the team. It is a bit of a risk. So I think, yeah, fair enough. Arteta did it when he was kind of, his hand was forced in the Chelsea game. But like you said, after that, he saw, what, like this can work. And he hasn't looked back since. And, the other point I would touch on is players can always learn and improve no matter their age. So obviously the young players can learn and improve with experience and age, etc. But the older players can also learn and improve a lot as well. By no means are they the finished article. Look at Jamie Vardy as an example. He's in his mid-30s now. He's still scoring 20 goals a season. He talks about his influence from Brendan Rodgers, who's helping him to continually learn and evolve and improve. And in a similar manner, I think Arteta's come in and he has added to Aubameyang's game last season and this season. He's added to Willian's performances overall. We didn't see it in the first half of the season, fair enough. But I do think that we're going to now start to see a better Willian. I'm not going to say the Willian of Chelsea, but I do think we're going to see a better Willian now. David Louise as well. I know he's come in for his criticism over his time at Arsenal, but I do think he's another player that overall Arteta has improved. Obviously, these are still players which have got errors in them, etc. But in terms of all-round overall performance, I do think Arteta's done a good job in improving the overall level of these various types of players.
I think that's a good point. So we kind of covered like Arteta's team selection, and we're kind of getting into the next point which I wanted to cover, which was like the way that Arsenal play and the way that he's developed different players. So just finishing up on the team selection, I think we did initially see a problem with Arteta's team selection, which was, it was kind of stagnant. He was sticking only with experienced players, but he's learned and developed as the team has. He hasn't gone back to his old way of playing. And we're kind of seeing the benefit of him sticking with players as well and trying to bring their confidence up. Coming on to like the way that Arsenal play, I think he really has developed players quite a lot. He's developed David Louise. David Louise looks like a completely different centre-back to the centre-back he looks like 2 years ago under Emery. And we're really seeing a kind of solid Arsenal foundation. I think at the beginning of the season, especially when we were going through that really bad run, a lot of criticism was coming towards Arsenal for the kind of chances that we were creating in games. There was a lot of comparisons being drawn to Emery's side, where we were porous in defence and we just weren't creating anything. I think our Aubameyang was barely having any shots on goal for the first few games, which we had. I think Arteta's learned to deal with that. But really, the way that Arsenal have learned to deal with that is by bringing in players like Emil Smith-Rowe and bringing in Martin Odegaard. I think we really suffered by not having Ozil in the team for whatever reason that was. I'm not going to speculate because we don't know. But I think we've managed to develop the way that we play around these players so that we create more chances. And also, we can't forget how important the defensive stability is that Arteta has brought to this team. I know we've conceded a lot of goals lately, but we've kind of been unlucky to concede these goals, I feel. I feel a lot of them are made on mistakes and a lot of them are made on teams being ridiculously clinical. You've got Aston Villa scoring within the first 5 minutes, Man City scoring within the first 5 minutes, Benfica scoring both shots they have on target, Leicester scoring the only shot really which they had in the game. These are teams being ridiculously clinical, and that's not going to continue, that kind of scoring rate against Arsenal. And aside from that, defensively, we're very good. You compare that to the Arsene Wenger years at Arsenal, where we played very well, but defensively, everyone was always screaming for a new centre-back and a new central defensive midfielder because we look so porous. And I think Arteta's managed to get that out of our game, and I was starting to score a little bit as well. I still think there's room for improvement when it comes to making opportunities up front, though. What do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, Arteta's done a lot to improve individual players. He's done a lot to improve the overall defensive performance from Arsenal. What I would say is he has, to an extent, prohibited the offensive output of Arsenal. We are scoring less goals than we were under Emery. We're scoring less goals than we were under Wenger. So the improved defensive performance and resilience does come at a bit of a cost. And, it's hard. It's a case of finding that balance. You don't want to be too offensive and leave yourself open at the back and exposed, but then you don't want to be good defensively, but then, best case scenario, you're drawing a game 0-0 kind of thing. You need an attacking outlet. You need to be a danger. I think in recent games, he is getting the balance right. The issue, though, is, going back to maybe players being on form and this and that, I think he has been let down by players, by the Arsenal players this season. Defensively, in terms of, I do think Arsenal have made far too many defensive errors this season, which have cost us points, which, in games we should have won. You think of the Burnley game where Granit Xhaka gets sent off recklessly. You think of the Leeds game where, we're playing Leeds away from home and, Pepe headbutts their guy. You think of the Wolves game where David Louise gets sent off and then Leno gets sent off. It's too many instances where we're losing games because of either one moment of kind of stupidity or a lack of, or like carelessness, a lack of attention to detail, or it's just individual player mistakes. And that's happened way too often this season. And it has cost Arsenal time and time again. Like I touched on before, we've lost 11 games this season. Like, that shouldn't happen. And obviously, like I said before, the buck stops with the manager, but I don't think the players get enough criticism. And in these, when you watch Arsenal play, a lot of the games that we've lost, we've actually played well overall. We've dominated for 60, 70, 75 minutes, whatever it may be. The opposition's had 2 chances and they've scored them both. Obviously, okay, you can argue the opposition's been clinical, but when you analyse the goals, it's also been poor defending from Arsenal. We could have stopped the goal at source, or, whatever it may have been. It could have been like trying to block the effort or better positional play or whatever it may have been. But it's one of those that, to an extent, I think there's only so much Arteta can drill into these players. If they're not good enough, we need to replace them. I know we did a bit of a mini clear out in January, but I think we need to carry it on. If we've got players that aren't listening to Arteta or they're not able to do what Arteta wants them to do, ultimately they're not good enough to be at Arsenal, and we need to get rid of them if that's the case. Like, don't get me wrong, I think some of the things, like, Arteta does make mistakes. I'm not saying he's immune from any criticism, but when you watch a lot of the Arsenal performances, the tactics have been good. The issue has been there's been 1 or 2 errors in the Arsenal team, and that's led to us being 1 or 2-0 down, and ultimately we've gone on to lose games or draw games as a result. Arsenal should be in a better position in the league, 100%. But I don't think the blame lies solely at Arteta's door for that. I do think the players need to take a lot of responsibility for a lot of these losses. Like I touched on, I think the tactics were good in a lot of our losses, but you saw it was individual errors, it was red cards, it was a needless challenge, a stupid penalty to give away, whatever it may have been. And it's these types of situations where all it takes is, you give away 1 goal and then the opposition sits back and defends. And all of a sudden, you find yourself in the position. You've got to try and break down the opposition. Your whole tactics are thrown out the window if they go 1-0 up or whatever. I don't know. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't think Arteta's immune from criticism. But at the same time, I don't think the players get enough criticism. A lot of the Arsenal players overall this season have been bang average. And, they need to look at themselves in the mirror, I genuinely think. Because they haven't been good enough to represent a club like Arsenal.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. Like, you're right when we talk about the kind of like losses we've seen Arsenal have. A lot of the time, we feel like we didn't deserve the loss. We feel like we've played well, even against Man City. I'm not going to say that they weren't the best team, but we could have easily come away from that game with a draw. Easily, we played very well. They weren't cutting us open time and time again. Really. For a lot of our losses, it's felt that way. And I think if you compare the way that we feel about Arsenal now, even though we are 11th, which is not good enough for this club at all, and we compare that to the way that we felt with Arsenal under Emery. Under Emery, it felt like we were in a dark hole and there was no way out. Everyone was unified in that. But when we kind of look at the losses that Arsenal have had this season, you can see that there's sparks of kind of life in this team. There's sparks of a future and potential. And I think that's the kind of difference. You can see what Arteta is trying to build here. There's a future for this team, which we didn't have under Unai Emery. And you feel like a lot of these losses which we've had have hinged on moments which were outside Arteta's control. They weren't about tactics, they were about temperament. And that is kind of down to the individual players themselves. At Man City, he's got the world's best players to select, right? So the kind of, and then the mentality that Pep has in his players is ridiculous. So you're mitigating the amount of mistakes and errors that these players are going to have. And Arteta's come into a dressing room with a toxic atmosphere. He's trying to get these players to play well, but sometimes that toxic atmosphere and that temperament is going to come out. I think it's a rebuilding job, and I hope that we're going to see a better Arsenal next year, which has benefited from the kind of recruitment that Arteta has put in and the kind of training that Arteta has put in. And hopefully that's the way that we're going to mitigate these kind of incidences happening, which are costing Arsenal points. So yeah, I really think that will hopefully lead to a reduction in the amount that Arsenal have lost, and then us climbing up the table as well. Kind of looking forward, with the way that we've been playing lately, especially forgetting about the way that we played earlier in the season, how do you think we are faring up when it comes to challenging for Europa League, challenging for the Champions League, and also possibly challenging to win the Europa Cup?
Yeah, I think it's probably a tough one, because you have seen the best and also the worst from Arsenal this season. You know, you've seen how good Arsenal can be, you know, like in our performance against Chelsea on Boxing Day, just after Christmas. And, you know, some of our performances this season, you know, we beat Man United at Old Trafford. We beat Liverpool in the Carling Cup. You know, we won the Community Shield. Like, we have had some good performances against big teams. So, yeah, so, you know, you have seen the best of Arsenal. But then, you know, Wolves have done the double over us in the Premier League. Aston Villa have done the double over us in the Premier League. Didn't even score against Aston Villa, like over both the games. So as good as Arsenal have been at times, you've also seen how terrible Arsenal have been at times. I think the biggest issue with Arsenal, which every Arsenal fan will appreciate kind of thing, is Arsenal can be successful this season, but we need to see consistency. If Arsenal can gain that consistency, definitely Arsenal can win the Europa League. Definitely Arsenal can, you know, climb up the table. I won't say where they can finish, but they can climb up the table. But we need that consistency. You know, at this moment in time, you are seeing the best and worst of Arsenal. Just as we're, you know, winning, like beating Chelsea, beating Man United at Old Trafford, you know, we're also losing to Burnley, and, you know, we're losing games we shouldn't be losing ultimately. You know, you think of the Wolves game, we dominated the first 44 minutes. Really, we should have been 4-5-0 up kind of thing. But it's one of those that it was a typical Arsenal performance, dominating the game. The opposition didn't look like scoring. And then out of nowhere, we've got 2 players sent off and we're losing the game 2-1 kind of thing. You see the best and worst of, you've seen the best and worst of Arsenal this season. And yeah, like I said, you know, for us to contemplate even, you know, coming close to reaching the final in the Europa League or winning the Europa League, we need that consistency. You know, when you look ahead to the last 16 game against Olympiacos in the Europa League, can we win it? Arsenal fans will be confident, but will we win it? And Arsenal fans will not be as confident, because they'll say exactly what I'm saying now. They'll say if Arsenal are consistent, you know, come onto the pitch over those 2 legs, and if they play like they want to win and they want to be in the quarterfinals, of course Arsenal can do it. You know, we saw last season, Olympiacos, obviously they're a good team, they're not bad, but they're nothing special. It's definitely a game that Arsenal can, you know, win over the 2 legs and progress to the next round. But we've seen the inconsistency from Arsenal from one match to the next. And it is a case of which Arsenal will we get. You know, if we get a good performing Arsenal, 100% will be in the quarterfinals. But, you know, we saw against Benfica how much of a struggle that was against a team that didn't even come out to attack, and they got 3 goals. So I don't know, you know, it's a tough one. We need more consistency if we want to think about doing well this season.
Yeah, I think that's the big challenge that Arteta's got is to get this consistency. And the way that he's going to get that is to stop Arsenal shooting themselves in the foot, pretty much. Because every time that we've lost a game, it's felt like we've beaten ourselves rather than the opposition has beaten us, right? Like against Benfica, we gave them 2 goals, pretty much. And in the first game as well, we gave them the penalty as well. The same thing against sort of Aston Villa when we conceded early on. The same thing against Leicester when we conceded early on. We just backed off. I actually blame El Neni more for that than Pablo Mari, who was marking Vardy. But we've shot ourselves in the foot multiple times this season, and that's led to our drop in consistency and our drop in points. I really think that Arteta needs to, I don't know how he can do this, right? But he needs to find a way to deal with this temperament that Arsenal players have, where they make stupid mistakes or they kind of see red and act really aggressively. And that's what's causing our kind of lack of consistency. We need to stop beating ourselves, and then we can really worry about kind of beating the opposition that's in front of us. I'm hoping we see that more next season after he's had another transfer window, another chance to continue to build his squad, and then we can go again next season and see what we can do. I'm not saying that this season is over, but really, I don't see us getting into the top 4 this season. I hope that we'll finish in the top 6 if we have a good run to the end of the season. But I think all Arsenal fans know that our best chance of getting into the Champions League this year is winning that Europa League Cup. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, when you look at Arsenal this season, we've not been good enough in the Premier League overall. So, you know, 100% our best chance is beating Olympiacos. Semi in the quarterfinals. You know, only 3 more teams to beat after that until you win the Europa League. By no means is it guaranteed, but you know, Arsenal have to go for it. You know, the players have to fight for it, show that determination to succeed and do well. You know, we hear a lot of the players talk how they want Champions League football, they want to play against the best. You know, we hear all this talk, but the players are the ones on the pitch. You know, go out and deliver, give us that performance, get us through to the next round. You know, when we talk about we hear players and they talk about how they want to win trophies, or you know, you hear a lot of the Arsenal players. They say, you know, they're the next big thing, or they're the best player at Arsenal. You know, like players like Lacazette, they talk a lot. When you look at a lot of these players and their careers at Arsenal over the time they've been at the club, you know, they need to do more to show why they're so good, or to show, you know, why we deserve Champions League football, whatever it may be. You know, you look at these players, they talk about, you know, oh, I'm good enough to be in a Champions League team and all this and that, and like whatever it may be. But then, you know, these are the players on the pitch, and then they're not delivering. They're not delivering in the Premier League. They're not delivering in the FA Cups, the Carling Cups overall. You know, we're through in the Europa League, but only just. You know, we're not smashing Benfica. We're just beating Benfica. I don't know. I think the players need to step up. You know, if we want to have a successful season, you know, they've got to represent the club and yes, step up and show why they want Champions League next season.
So I think in summary, some criticism towards Arteta has been fair. I think he's also had to deal with a kind of difficult dressing room, especially at the beginning of the season. And he's also had to deal with individual mistakes kind of hampering his development. You know, you spend the whole week planning for a game, you get out on the pitch with a game plan, and then you can see within 2 minutes, your game plan's out the window, right? And if it's because of a stupid mistake that Arsenal have made or a player has made, that's not really Arteta's fault. I think we can criticize him a little bit for his squad selection, especially at the beginning, but now I think he's kind of learned from that and he's being a bit more fluid. I think you also said that he kind of didn't know his first team 11 at one point. Do you think he's kind of settled on that now? And do you think he's also had players free from injury now to kind of consolidate that first 11?
Yeah, what I would say now is I think he is more sure of his first 11, which is good because, you know, you do need some continuity. You know, when you think of when Leicester won the league, you know, a few years back, when Liverpool have won the league, when Man City have won the league in the past, you know, you've got, as an example, 8 out of the 11 players playing 35 games or more. So overall, they've had consistent teams. You build up partnerships. You get that telepathic understanding. Where players are going to be on the pitch at certain points in time, when going through certain, attacking build-up phases, as an example, or defensively. If you're in a 2-on-2 counter-attack, where your defensive partner will be. You can trust them, as an example, in those situations. Whereas I think the problem with Arsenal is that because of numerous injuries, we haven't had that continuity. And therefore, when you're getting into these situations, you don't have that telepathic understanding. You don't necessarily know where your partner will be. And it does make it more difficult. When you don't have that trust in the team, it does make it harder to win games. I don't think that's necessarily Arteta's fault. It's just to do with the players being injured and not having that continuity in the team. But hopefully it's something that we can address over time, be it towards the end of this season and the start of next season. Hopefully we can get, ultimately a group of players which can play 30, 35 games in a Premier League season. Hopefully we can try and overcome a lot of these injuries that we've had historically. And moving forward, we've got every chance of success if so. But, players like Thomas Partey, players like Kieran Tierney, Aubameyang, we need to keep these players fit. For the majority of the season, we can't have them playing 15 games in a season, 20 games in a season, overall competitions. We need them playing 30 to 35 Premier League games, and then you'll truly see the best of Arsenal.
I hope we will see that with a proper pre-season and lead up to next season. I think players like Thomas Partey were kind of hampered by the fact that he came in very late, the last day in the transfer window, and we signed him, didn't have a pre-season, came in very delayed. I mean, if you look at like our first 11, we've got Leno, who had one injury problem, but still been okay this season. Kieran Tierney, who's been out for large parts of the season. Gabriel's had a long-term injury. Next to Gabriel, you probably have Rob Holding. It's a mix between Rob Holding or David Louise, probably. Then next to them, you've got Bellerin, who's also had injury problems this season. In front, you've got Thomas Partey, who's had massive injury problems this season, which is such a shame. He was our star signing, really the player that we wanted to come in and make an impact this season. Arteta basically hasn't had him at all. You've got Xhaka, who has been okay. Then you've got Emil Smith-Rowe, who's got a history of injury problems. He's again injured, so Arteta's again going to be struggling without him. Probably got Odegaard, but he's kind of come in for the last month in the middle, so he hasn't really had time to settle into the team. Then out wide, you've got Saka. Saka's been the one guy that has been kind of protected from injury problems, but he's got a lot of games under his belt. And Arteta needs to think about managing this 19-year-old who's probably in the red zone and probably has kind of muscle fatigue. We need to think about, should he be playing every single game? Then up top, you've got Abba, who has been in and out of the season for a variety of reasons. Every time he's scored and kind of gone on a scoring run, he's been out. So I think that's our first 11, and Arteta's had to deal with a lot of injuries and a lot of changes. If we can get a proper preseason behind those players and get them playing week in, week out, suddenly we've got a very decent squad. Definitely a squad that will be challenging for Europe and possibly beyond. So I think criticism at Arteta is fair at points, where he's had a lot to deal with at the same time. And now suddenly we can start building that kind of telepathy between players, which you have in squads who have played together game in, game out, but you kind of don't have at Arsenal right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what I would add to that as well is, I think we should ultimately reserve the criticism or the judgment of Arteta until the end of the season, because, a lot of the fans that are, calling for him to be sacked now, if, Arsenal go on to win the Europa League, all of a sudden these fans will be praising Arteta, calling him a genius and a miracle worker kind of thing.
Yeah.
If Arsenal could get close to the top four, again, you'd have a lot of people coming out and saying what a great manager he is, whereas now they'd probably be saying the opposite. But then, on the other hand, if you flip that coin around, if Arsenal, lose to Olympiacos, if Arsenal end the season 12th, as an example, then justifiably, it wouldn't have been a good season for Arsenal. And, action will need to be taken, not necessarily against Arteta, but action will need to be taken to support Arteta, to help Arsenal to build the team in Arteta's vision. And, you know, if that happens and then we don't have a good season next season, as an example, then you can see and understand enhanced criticism of Arteta and things like that. But at this moment in time, you do have to remember that we had a squad under Wenger. Emery didn't really have too much time to change things. He didn't have massive time to bring in players of his own and his vision. He then obviously got sacked. We brought in Arteta, who wants to play a different vision, you know, different philosophy. He needs time to bring in his players and to play the way that he wants to play. So I think ultimately, you know, this season has not been the best of seasons. Every Arsenal fan will acknowledge that. Hopefully we can redeem it with the Europa League. If we don't, Arteta needs to be backed in the summer. And then, you know, we can reserve criticism once this season's over. We'll see how we've performed overall. And then we'll see how we perform next season. You know, even if we have a bad season this season, but next season's a great season as an example, then overall Arteta's done a good job. But we have to see what happens this season, see what happens next season after Arteta's had a bit more time to bring in players that he wants to bring in. And then we'll take it from there. But don't get me wrong, I'm not, you know, Arteta, some of the criticism is fair, but he also needs time to bring in his players and to implement his philosophy in the team.
Yeah, I think fans need to remember the history of the club and also the business model of the club as well. We're a club which gives a manager time, lets him develop, and that's how we kind of find success, right? That's how the Arsenal of Wenger found success, and that's how the Man United of old found success as well. The kind of fans calling for Arteta to be sacked so early on, I agree. Like, even if we don't win the Europa League, right, I'm very conscious that we might not win it. It's, you know, you can get knocked out at any point. And we don't get into Europe this year. Even if that doesn't happen, I still think we keep Arteta and back him in the summer, because the kind of Arsenal fans that want him to be sacked, or maybe the same kind of Arsenal fans wanted Emery to be sacked, they kind of think that we have a business model which is like Chelsea or Man City, right? Where you don't win something in one season, so you sack a manager, get a new manager with a completely new philosophy, completely have to back them again with millions of funds to bring in new players to try and implement their philosophy. Arsenal just don't have the capital to do that. We need to buy a manager, give them time to implement their vision, give it 2 or 3, like a year or 2 or 2 or 3 years, and see what they can develop. And also, if you look at the kind of most successful teams of the last few years, Pep's Man City and Klopp's Liverpool, both of those managers came into their teams, were heavily criticized at the beginning, didn't bring instant success within a year, and then started to deliver once they had time to build their squads and build that cohesion. And that's what you kind of need to see at Arsenal, with less resources than both of these teams have. So I think, yeah, people calling for Arteta's head right now don't understand the kind of business model which Arsenal want in, and the kind of financial restraints which Arsenal have. We can't keep switching managers every time a manager doesn't perform for 3 months. We need to give them that time to build that success. And then hopefully, if he does have that, you'll start seeing the kind of cohesive play which we see Man City have, and the kind of cohesive play which we saw Liverpool have last year. Yeah, I think that's fair. So in total, I think we give Arteta hopefully another year, another backing in the summer, and then if he doesn't perform next year, that criticism is completely fair. Then you have to look at whether you keep him or not. But for now, I think he's doing very well with this squad, and hopefully we'll have a strong end to the season, and we can see what we can really build next year with a really good pre-season. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I think that's us covered for today. Did you want to add anything else, Das?
No, I think that's all for today.
Yeah, so thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to like, comment, and hit that subscribe button as well. We'll be producing more videos like this, hopefully on a weekly basis. But yeah, we will keep you up to date, and we'll be back again after the Burnley game to give our opinions on that result. Hopefully that is a win. Until then, see you later, guys, and up the Gooners. Bye, everyone.